be the case. What I hope we will do, we'll go any place that people want. People can ask questions or make comments. And I hope during the course of the discussion, you will talk a little bit what you perceive to be happening, not just in general, but to your own lives and the lives of the people that you know.
The answer is definitely yes to those questions, but maybe more importantly, it's this, because Senator Sanders has shown up in community after community after community for older Vermonters now for decades. And he does what I think all of us expect our elected officials to do, which is come talk to the people that he represents. We're extremely fortunate to be able to have the kind of access that the Senator has let us have for many years, and he deserves a big round of applause.
And it is a debate which really does not reflect where the American people are. When you see a debate, you think, well, maybe half the people are here and half the people are there, and there's a clash of ideas. That really is not what's going on. Because despite what you may see on television, on major issue after major issue, more or less the American people kind of agree. But the dynamics of American politics today is that what goes on in Washington is not a reflection of what ordinary Americans want and believe. It is a reflection of what billionaires and wealthy campaign contributors want. All right? Give you some examples. In the last year, my Republican colleagues proposed a variety of legislation that would throw up to 32 million Americans off of the health insurance they currently have. Almost nobody in America thinks that that makes sense. Legislation, and that legislation was defeated by one vote. What was not defeated, and when you hear Beth and Rita talk about the need for funding for nutrition programs or basic needs for seniors, keep in mind that a tax bill was recently passed a few months ago, which will drive up at the end of 10 years the deficit by $1.4 trillion, while giving 83% of the benefits to the top 1%. Now, at a time when we already have massive income and wealth inequality, where, if you can believe it, the three wealthiest people in America now own more wealth than the bottom half of the American people. 3 Americans. Most Americans, the overwhelming majority of Americans, do not believe that we should be giving hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks to the top 1%. How did that come? And then, you see, then after that is done and the deficit goes up, and Paul Ryan, who is the Speaker of the House, who I think is beginning to catch on that that agenda is not what the people in Wisconsin or America want, has announced he's not running for re-election. That's right. Because this is the agenda and this is the plan. The plan is, this comes from, anybody here who know who the Koch brothers are? Right, the Koch brothers are the second wealthiest family in America. They're worth, I don't know, give or take $100 billion. Hard to keep up with them. What's $1 billion here or $1 billion there? And they have put, over the years, billions of dollars into the political process. And this is their theory. And you think I'm kidding you, I am not. Their theory is, their ideology is, what their belief is that government should play a very, very minuscule role in American society. And essentially, what they believe is not that we should cut Social Security and Medicare. A lot of people in Washington believe we should cut Social Security and Medicare. They believe we should eliminate Social Security and Medicare. What freedom, to their mind, is the end of government programs. When you are on Medicare, or Medicaid, or Social Security, you are not free. They believe that we should eliminate public education, move toward charter schools. believe that we should privatize the Veterans Administration, the Postal Service. That is their philosophy. 40 years ago, that philosophy appeared to the American people to be crazy. Today, it is part of the mainstream of where Republicans are coming from. And those are the struggles that we have every single day. And it's manifested in the budget. And here's the bad news, but I'll give you the good news at the end of this. Bad news is President Trump brought forth the budget. And despite what he said in the campaign, which I know will shock you that he was not telling the truth, I know you're all shocked about that. But Trump said during his campaign he was not going to cut Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security. In his budget, he brought forth a $1 trillion over 10-year cut to Medicaid. Now, you know what that means? That's not just for lower income people. That's just the Dr. Dinosaur program here in Vermont for the children. That is nursing home care. Who do you think pays for nursing home care in this country? Significantly, it is Medicaid. You have a $1 trillion cut in Medicaid. Families no longer able to take care of their parents, place them in decent nursing homes. What happens to those people who are dealing with Alzheimer's or other serious illnesses? What happens to the families who would have to figure out how they're going to take care of their parents? Trump proposed a $500 billion cut in Medicare. He proposed cuts in the Social Security Disability Fund. That's the bad news. The good news that we defeated every single one of those proposals. $50 billion in profit. They pay out huge compensation packages to the CEOs of these companies. They make tens of millions of dollars a year in compensation. But meanwhile, 1 out of every 5 Americans cannot afford to fill the prescriptions given them by their doctors. I remember talking a few years ago to a doctor in Underhill, and she was saying that about 1/4 of the prescriptions she writes, the working class people, are unable to be filled. Now just think about how crazy that is. What is the sense of going to a doctor when the doctor makes a diagnosis, writes out a prescription, you can't afford to fill that prescription? Right now, the situation is so bad, and the pharmaceutical industry is so powerful, that over the years, Congress, uniquely in the world, in the industrialized world, has not been able to pass one piece of legislation to control the drug companies and the prices that they charge. The truth is that today, you can leave here, go to your pharmacist, and try to get a prescription filled, and the pharmacist will say, well, I'm sorry, the price of that medicine has gone up double or triple. And in fact, what we have seen is that since 2014, the cost of 60 drugs commonly taken by older Americans has more than doubled. And 20 of them have at least quadrupled the price. And the reason is drug companies can charge any price they want. There is no control over them. Now, these guys are incredibly powerful. Over the past 20 years, listen to this, drug companies have spent more than $3.5 billion on lobbying and hundreds of millions in campaign contributions. Got that? $3.5 billion in lobbying. That means that virtually every member of Congress, not me, but almost everybody else, has received money from the pharmaceutical industry. Give you an example. I was out in California last year, and out in California, they have something that we don't have. You can put statewide ballot initiatives out there, referendum. And what they said is they wanted the state government not to be paying more for prescription drugs than does the Veterans Administration, which negotiates prices with the drug companies. Do you know how much money, who wants to guess how much money the pharmaceutical industry spent in California to defeat that initiative? Answer, $130 million. In one state, on one initiative. In other words, these guys literally have endless amounts of money. Any state, and I know in Vermont there is some effort here to do something which I think is important. All right, so what are the issues? Issue number one, Drug companies can charge any price that they want. Millions of Americans are getting sick, in some cases dying because they can't afford to buy the medicine they need. That's issue number one. Issue number two, we pay by far the highest prices in the world for the same exact medicine sold in other countries. Some of you may remember a number of years ago, I was the first member of Congress, that was when I was in the House, not in the Senate, to take people who was up in Franklin County actually, over the border in Canada. We went up to Montreal to buy breast cancer drugs. And I'll never forget that. And this is what happened. We had a couple of buses going from St. Albans to Montreal. And these were women, working class women, who were struggling with breast cancer. They were fighting for their lives. We went up to Montreal. We had planned this all out, but it was just something to see with your own eyes. Women walking into the druggist there, they bought tamoxifen. Tamoxifen was then a widely prescribed breast cancer drug, and they paid 10% of the price they were paying in Vermont. 1/10 of the price for the same exact medicine in the same exact bottle made by the same exact company. And by the way, Canada has the second highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. In Europe, the prices are much, much less. Now, out of that trip, other members of Congress and the Senate did it. And the truth is that today, millions of people are now, through the internet or going across the border, buying less expensive medicine in Canada. So there are several approaches that we are working on to try to take on the pharmaceutical industry. Number one, I am not a great believer in unfettered free trade. That's another discussion, but that is what exists. So if the food that you eat, if the clothing that you wear comes from all over the world, why cannot pharmacists or prescription drug distributors be able to purchase significantly lower cost prescription drugs from Canada or from Europe if they are FDA approved? All right, that will substantially lower the cost of prescription drugs in this country. Now, we've been trying to do this for a number of years. Actually, there's some bipartisan support on that effort. There's some Republicans who support it. Pharmaceutical industry has spent hundreds of millions of dollars lying about this effort and trying to stop it. All right, we're going to continue to do that, and I understand here in our legislature there's some discussion of doing the same right here in Vermont, which is a very good idea, okay? Issue number two, and this is how crazy it is. Medicaid pays a certain price for prescription drugs. The Veterans Administration pays a different price, and Medicare pays a different price. Makes no sense whatsoever. So what we want to see is Medicare would spend zillions of dollars on prescription drugs, be able to negotiate with the pharmaceutical industry the price of those drugs. Yeah. So when you go in spending billions of dollars, you sit down and you say, you know what, Canada, they charge this. In Australia, they charge that. In France, they charge that. You're not going to double the price. We're going to negotiate what a price is. And if we do that, we will substantially lower the price of prescription drugs. So there are a number of things that have to be done. But the high cost of prescription drugs is one of the great healthcare crises we face in this country today, and something we will continue to work very, very hard on. Okay, impeachment is, needless to say, a very, very serious process which takes place for high crimes and misdemeanors. As everybody in this room knows, there is right now an intensive investigation done by Mr. Mueller, who is now examining, starting off with the question of whether or not the Trump campaign colluded with Russians. And he is in the midst of a very, very extensive investigation. It would be premature as somebody who, if there was an impeachment process which starts in the House, would be a judge to make a statement on that. But let me say this. There has been discussion in the media about the possibility of Trump firing Rod Rosenstein or Mueller himself. From where I can see right now, that would be a significant obstruction of justice. So in other words, what I'm telling you is the process, before you ask me a question, you know, I think all of you know that there is probably nobody in the Congress who feels more strongly about the terrible, terrible things that Trump has done as president. That is a different issue than impeachment. If Trump obstructs justice by ending the investigation of him, which talks about whether or not there were criminal activities, I believe that in itself is likely an impeachable offense. Okay? Okay.
Senator, my name is John Murphy. I live in Barry. I'd like to speak in support of a Republican-inspired tax break called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, and to make sure that's protected. The median rent paid by renters in Vermont is $871, and there are 2+ year waiting lists for people trying to get into subsidized housing.
Thank you very much, John, and I agree with you. And I believe we did have some success in the last budget in expanding low-income housing tax credit. And the issue that you're touching on, the broader issue of affordable housing, depending on where you live in the state of Vermont, I can tell you that in Burlington it is a very significant issue, and that's true all over this country. So I am a strong supporter of low-income housing tax credit. Yeah.
Good morning, Bernie. My name's Art Edelstein, Calais, Vermont, Brooklyn, New York, James Madison High School. So my question is this. Whatever the Democrats did under the budget agreement that kept programs such as LIHEAP, I assume also, in essence, raised the debt. So my question is this. Can we rewrite the tax code when Democrats take over Congress in 2019?
Yeah.
In my view, for a start, the Democrats should repeal all of the tax breaks for the wealthy and large corporations that were incorporated in the Trump tax proposal. Look, this is not complicated stuff. It comes back to massive levels of income and wealth inequality. Over the last 34 years, the people on the top have done very, very well, while the middle class has been shrinking, and we've got 40 million people living in poverty. So it seems to me what Congress's job should be is to pay attention to the needs of working families, the elderly, and the children. That's what we're talking about today. I mean, again, this is America. Should Rita or anybody else have to worry about funding a Meals on Wheels program? Don't tell me that in America we can't fund that and then say, oh yes, we can give tax breaks to the Koch brothers and other billionaires. So we got to get our priorities right. And our priorities are to simply say, not in a confiscatory way, but in a fair way. If you are making billions of dollars a year, you're going to have to start paying your fair share of taxes. If you are a large multinational corporation, you can't stash all of your profits in the Cayman Islands and in other tax havens and not end up paying a nickel in federal taxes in a given year, which is what now exists. So a fair tax system says that if you're a profitable corporation, if you're very wealthy, you will pay your fair share. We'll use that money to make sure that everybody in this country has at least a minimum and decent standard of living. Not more complicated than that to my eyes. Because I introduced that legislation. And here is, again, a point that I want to keep reiterating. In that when we think about politics, it's thinking about national priorities, when you give tax breaks to billionaires and not have enough funding for the Meals on Wheels program. But it's also looking around the rest of the world and asking, what are other countries doing? So it turns out, as I know Mary Alice knows, and maybe all of you know, that we are the only major country on earth, the only one, not to guarantee health care to all people as a right. Now, many years ago in the 60s, under President Johnson, Medicare and Medicaid were passed. Right now, Medicare is the most popular health insurance program in the country. It has its problems, which we want to improve upon, and I'll talk about that in a second, but it is very, very popular. My view is we should expand Medicare to everybody, which is what a Medicare for All single-payer program is about. Now, when I ran for president, people said, Bernie, that is a crazy idea. Oh, we can't do that, it's too radical, it's too this, it's too that. Well, guess what? In the last couple of months, there have been a number of polls that have come out. One poll has 59% of the American people supporting Medicare for all. Washington Post poll the other day has 51% supporting Medicare for all. 3 years ago, when I introduced that legislation in the Senate, it had 0 co-sponsors. This time it had 16 co-sponsors. And this time, all over the country, you're seeing candidates for the House and the Senate running and saying, of course health care is a right, of course I support Medicare for all. So we are making enormous progress on that issue of joining the rest of the world. Here's the other issue that Mary Alice also knows, that we have to ask ourselves. How does it happen that we end up spending almost twice as much per person on health care as do the people of any other country? And the answer is that every other country understands that the function of healthcare is to provide it to all people in a cost-effective way, to control the prices of drug companies. In our country, healthcare is significantly determined and directed by the insurance companies. And in case you don't know it, let me break the bad news to you. Insurance companies are not worried about quality, cost-effective health care. They are worried about making as much money as they possibly can. So, in my view, and we are making real progress on that, we've got to join every other major country on earth. We've got to control the price of prescription drugs, and we need to move toward a Medicare for all. Now, let me pick up on another point. Medicare is a very good program, but it has major faults. Major lackings. What are they? Does Medicare cover dental care? No. Our legislation covers dental care and dentures and so forth. Does Medicare cover the cost of eyeglasses and optical problems? No. Our legislation does that as well. So what we want to do is improve Medicare and guarantee it to all people. And at the end of the day, that will be less expensive per person than the current system. Now, what happens there is you will see 30-second ads all over the country, maybe in Vermont, saying, Sanders wants to raise your taxes. Terrible guy. What they will forget to tell you, if you are a business person or just a plain citizen, you're no longer going to have to pay your premiums to an insurance companies, and you won't have any deductibles or copays, all right? So this effort of Medicare for All is gaining a lot of support around the country. It will be vigorously opposed by the drug companies and the insurance companies. All right, in my view, the second point you raised, moving forward for a universal primary care is an excellent idea, but let these guys say what they'd like on it.